27 miles. You can see from there the UK.
Really?
Yeah, you can see the door.
Yeah.
The front of you, yeah. You can see the light of the UK.
This is the sound of a business transaction. He's selling a destination, a promise of safety, visible across 27 miles of treacherous water.
So you know somebody who will drive the boat?
I have a person. You don't need to worry.
He believes the British system will continue helping migrants. But what he calls the system on the other side is, in fact, a vast and profitable industry. An industry run by a company called Serco, whose business model depends entirely on a steady supply of people just like the ones he's sending.
So, first of all, how much is the cost?
For example,
In which currency and how much?
how many people? You don't know
One. We do one, then more will maybe come, but one.
Okay. And I check it. You.
Huh?
7,000
Which currency? Dollar?
pound.
Euro?
Pound.
He needs them to cross once to earn his fee. The company's business model, however, thrives on the system continuing indefinitely. It is a £4.7 billion government contract, paid by the taxpayer to manage the consequences of these crossings. It creates a strange and troubling ecosystem, which leads to a fundamental question. How did the desperate journey of a human being become the raw material for a multi-billion pound government contract?
Welcome to the Discovery Clock series.
The answer begins decades earlier, in a Britain that looks very different from today. We begin in the glamour of the roaring 1920s. In 1929, the American entertainment giant Radio Corporation of America, RCA, created a British subsidiary, RCA Great Britain, with a simple job: to service the new, revolutionary talkies that were sweeping through cinemas. Across more than 350 cinemas, their specialist engineering business kept the projectors rolling for decades. But that wouldn't last forever. Their first great transformation would come from the shadows of the Cold War. In the 1960s, the company won a contract at RAF Fylingdales on the windswept North York moors, helping to operate the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, a nerve centre for NATO's nuclear defence, brought online in September 1963. It was here, working alongside the US Air Force and the British Royal Air Force personnel, that the company experienced a revelation. They realised their true potential wasn't in engineering a product, but in managing it. They tested this new theory in 1984, winning the Ministry of Defence's first ever outsourcing contract, beating firms such as Capita and GEC Marconi to manage a military warehouse at Donington in Shropshire. Serco applied the lessons from Fylingdales and proved they could run defence inventory control efficiently, delivering higher productivity and saving the Treasury millions.
Increasing industrial output, more jobs, action to help to keep prices down, a better deal with the oil.
Just as this was happening, a much louder revolution was shaking Britain to its core.
We're going straight to the palace where we think Margaret Thatcher is leaving.
Yes, we think this is Mrs. Thatcher this time. This is the first time we've seen Mrs. Thatcher as Prime Minister, and the cheers show it. Britain's first woman Prime Minister, a lot slower than the other car, which sped out some 50...
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
The year is 1979. The new government, led by Margaret Thatcher, arrives with a powerful ideology known as the New Right. Thatcher's cabinet, including Chancellor Geoffrey Howe and Business Secretary Sir Keith Joseph, believed the state was too big, too costly, and too inefficient, and that the private sector held the answer to their spending problems. The age of privatisation had begun. The promise was a leaner, more efficient Britain, unshackled from the old state-run industries. But for vast swathes of the country, this new economic model felt less like liberation and more like a wrecking ball. The drive for efficiency and cheaper overseas production meant shutting down the industries that were once the backbone of the British nation: the coal mines, the steel works, and the shipyards. It triggered some of the most bitter industrial disputes in British history, unleashing huge protests and leaving deep and lasting scars on entire communities.
And in Trafalgar Square, confrontation. Into the evening it goes on, police chasing gangs up and down the West End streets.
It was a policy that would have long-lasting effects, creating a legacy of unemployment and social decay that would haunt these regions for decades to come. It was in this new, fractured landscape that the company saw its opportunity. When its parent, RCA, was taken over by General Electric in June 1986, the local management of RCA Great Britain seized their chance. They bought the company themselves in 1987 and gave it a new name, one that reflected their forward-looking philosophy: Serco, short for Service Company. 1 year later, on November 23, 1988, Serco was listed on the London Stock Exchange with an initial offering of 10 million shares. The principle was simple: the government would still pay the bills, at first through the Department of Health and Social Security, later the Home Office and Ministry of Justice. But private companies, hired on contracts overseen by civil servants, would now do the work of the state. And Serco was becoming the master of the model. In 1997, they took over maintenance of the Docklands Light Railway, guiding the trains of London's future. At the same time, they helped operate the atomic weapons establishment at Aldermaston, the core of Britain's nuclear deterrent, winning multiple contracts from the Defence Evaluation and Research Agency. Not satisfied with just winning contracts, they began buying the competition, acquiring American IT provider Resource Consultants Inc. in 1998 in a deal worth $535 million. By the late 1990s, Serco was a global force, running 7 prisons in Australia, managing air traffic control towers across North America, and employing more than 38,000 staff worldwide. But in 1997, the UK's political landscape shifted dramatically. After 18 years of Conservative rule, Tony Blair's New Labour won a decisive victory, promising modernisation and reform.
As I stand here before number 10 Downing Street, I know the huge responsibility that is upon me and the great trust that the British people have placed in me.
The foundations for one of New Labour's defining policies, the Private Finance Initiative, or PFI, were laid earlier under the Conservative government of John Major in 1992. PFI was introduced partly as a response to the Maastricht Treaty's requirements in 1993, which imposed strict limits on public sector borrowing and debt. The goal was to encourage private sector investment in public infrastructure, allowing government projects to be financed off balance sheet, meaning that they do not show up as part of the national debt. Despite this innovation, PFI was initially met with resistance and skepticism from the public sector, which lacked trust and experience in such partnerships, and from private investors wary of new complexities. Its implementation was limited and slow during the early 1990s. It was under Tony Blair's government, however, that PFI was adopted on a much larger scale and became a hallmark of New Labour's public sector reform agenda. Blair's administration significantly increased the use of PFI contracts, especially in the NHS, introducing a form of partial privatisation by shifting hospital capital investment and many support services to private firms. Hospitals built under PFI were no longer publicly owned, but leased back to NHS trusts under lengthy contracts, often spanning 25 to 60 years, with annual payments that created long-term liabilities for the public sector, namely the government. Between 1997 and 2010, the UK signed an average of 55 PFI's contracts per year, cumulatively worth over £54 billion, with the eventual taxpayer cost exceeding £300 billion. For companies such as Serco, PFI represented a major business opportunity, with the company holding £3 billion worth of contracts by 2003 in NHS hospitals, railways, and air traffic control, firmly embedding private sector providers in public services. Meanwhile, Blair's government also restructured the asylum system with the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999, creating the National Asylum Support Service, or NASS. NASS centralised asylum support, introducing a dispersal policy moving asylum seekers from costly, overcrowded areas in London and the South East to more affordable regions in the Midlands, North East, Yorkshire, Wales, and Scotland. Asylum seekers, though excluded from mainstream welfare benefits and the right to work, received taxpayer-funded support including free NHS healthcare, subsidised housing, food vouchers, and weekly allowances. By 2020, around 45,000 asylum seekers were supported through contracts with housing associations and over 300 local authorities, effectively turning local governments into contractors within a national system. Beyond asylum policy, Blair's premiership was also marked by his decision to open UK borders fully to migrants from the 10 new Eastern European EU member states in 2004. Unlike many European countries that phased in access controls, Blair's administration allowed immediate access to the UK labour market, leading to an influx of several million migrants over the next decade. This rapid population increase put considerable strain on public services, housing, and infrastructure, especially in working-class communities in the Midlands, Yorkshire, North East, and parts of London. Critics argue that this policy was implemented without adequate planning for social impact, contributing to tensions and fueling the political debates that persist today. This framework facilitated private companies, such as Serco, to entrench themselves substantially in delivering essential public services. They had built a corporate empire on one idea, that anything the government could do, they could do better. A trusted partner with a strong public sector ethos, as described by government advisors. Soon, the company would take this model into its most complex and sensitive area yet. It was a move that would prove more profitable and more controversial than anyone could have imagined. To understand why a company such as Serco shifted its business affairs into housing migrants, we have to understand the early political climate of the now 2010s. Britain was in the grip of austerity. Following the 2008 financial crisis, Chancellor George Osborne and Prime Minister David Cameron led a government whose driving obsession was cutting costs and reducing the national deficit, which reached £153 billion by 2009 and 2010.
Because the legacy we've been left is so bad, the measures that we need to deal with it will be unavoidably tough. But people's lives, and this is vital, people's lives will be worse unless we do something now. The cause of building a fairer society will be set back for years unless we do something now. We are not alone in this. Many countries around the world have been living beyond their means, and they too are having to face the music. And I make this promise to everyone in Britain. You will not be left on your own in this. We are all in this together, and we are going to get through this together. We will carry out Britain's unavoidable deficit reduction plan in a way that strengthens and unites our country. We're not doing this because we want to. We're not driven by some theory or some ideology. We are doing this as a government because we have to, driven by the urgent truth that unless we do so, people will suffer and our national interest will suffer too.
By 2012, most government departments faced real terms cuts of more than 20%. Every department was under pressure, and all were looking for ways to save as much money as possible. Asylum accommodation, then managed through a patchwork of more than 450 local councils and scores of housing associations, was seen as an easy target. To address this, the Home Office under Home Secretary Theresa May launched a radical experiment in privatisation.
There are millions of people in poorer countries who would love to live in Britain. And there is a limit to the amount of immigration any country can and should take. While we must fulfil our moral duty to help people in desperate need, we must also have an immigration system that allows us to control who comes to our country. Because when immigration is too high, when the pace of change is too fast, it's impossible to build a cohesive society. It's difficult for schools and hospitals and core infrastructure like housing and transport to cope. And we know that for people in low-paid jobs, wages are forced down even further, while some people are forced out of work altogether.
In March 2012, they introduced the Commercial and Operating Managers Procuring Asylum Support Contracts, better known as COMPASS. The plan was to dismantle the old system and replace it with 6 massive regional contracts, inviting competitive bids from the private sector with the goal of saving around £140 million over 7 years. The tender attracted a mix of national and international firms, security giants such as G4S, Reliance, Clear Springs, and Serco. Serco's strength was not in owning or managing housing directly, but in orchestrating the whole process as the prime contractor. They would be the sole point of contact for the Home Office, managing a complex supply chain of more than 50 subcontractors, including smaller property managers and housing charities. To keep costs down, Serco began leasing over 5,000 properties from private landlords, often in the cheapest rental markets across the northwest of England, the West Midlands, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. This strategy proved successful for Serco. They secured 2 of the 6 original COMPASS contracts, covering the Northwest, Scotland, and Northern Ireland from 2012 until 2019, with an initial value of more than £400 million. G4S won contracts in the West Midlands, Yorkshire and Humberside, and the North East. Clear Springs won in London, the South West, and Wales. All contracts were signed in March 2012 and became fully operational by January 2013. The COMPASS contracts consolidated what had been 22 separate agreements into just 6 national deals, transforming service delivery for the roughly 23,000 asylum seekers in supported accommodation at the time. However, the new system compromised the direct accountability that had existed under council management. as academic Dr. Jonathan Darling of Durham University highlighted in his research, a fragmented network emerged where responsibility was blurred and oversight was weakened. The public service ethos of holistic care gave way to private sector logic focused on delivering contracts at the lowest possible cost. By 2019, the Compass contracts, initially due to expire in 2017 but extended twice, were replaced by the Asylum Accommodation and Support Contracts, or AASC, signed under the new Home Secretary, Sajid Javid. These new contracts had a significantly increased value, approximately £4 billion initially, spread over 10 years, from 2019 to 2029. Serco secured two major contracts, the Midlands and East of England contract, valued at £1.03 billion, and the North West England contract, worth about £1.1 billion. Mears Group entered the arena at the same time and took over some contracts from Serco covering the North East, Yorkshire and Humberside, Scotland and Northern Ireland, with a combined value exceeding £1.4 billion. These contracts meant Serco and Mears together were responsible for accommodation for over 20,000 asylum seekers, nearly half of the UK total in supported lodging. At this time, the expanded market for asylum accommodation was estimated by the Home Office to be worth £15.3 billion over the next decade, reflecting the government's continued reliance on privatised provision. For Serco alone, the prize had grown from hundreds of millions to multi-billion-pound contracts, cementing its role as the ultimate middleman in this outsourced system. But Serco's ambitions didn't end at Britain's borders. Following its September 2022 acquisition of ORS, a Swiss provider of migrant services in Austria, Switzerland, Germany, Belgium and Italy, Serco rapidly broadened its European footprint. By 2025, ORS, as part of Serco, operated in 10 European countries and employed around 2,500 people, managing refugee accommodation centres, delivering integration programs, and supporting thousands of asylum seekers across the continent. In December 2023, Serco announced the €40 million acquisition of European Home Care, EHC, Germany's largest private immigration services provider, adding over 100 facilities and care for more than 36,000 asylum seekers to its portfolio. EHC, founded in 1989, generated revenues of €150 million in 2023 and employed more than 2,000 staff. Serco's former group chief executive, Mark Irwin, described this as a decisive move to strengthen our position as a leading partner in immigration services for European governments, and explicitly tied the deal to complementing ORS, now fully branded as ORS, a Serco company. With these acquisitions, Serco transformed itself into the preeminent provider of government-contracted asylum accommodation and support services not just in the UK, but across much of Europe. Serco's perfected business model, leasing thousands of properties from private landlords, managing a vast subcontractor network, and delivering services under rigid, fixed-price contracts, now runs on a continent-wide scale. But while the government believed it delivered its promised financial savings to the British people, the cost of the privatised asylum housing system was about to become terrifyingly clear. Now that we have seen how Serco quietly conquered Britain, from its cinemas to its nuclear weapons deals, and how privatisation played a big role in all of this, there is a bigger controversial chapter, from its multi-billion-pound hotel crisis, its riots, and its involvement with BlackRock. That requires its own separate investigation. That investigation continues in Part 2. Click here to see that conclusion. I want also to give a massive thank you for watching this video and for your patience and support. And as always, see you in the next one.